I'm an oil painter as well as a watercolour painter and soft sculptor. I've started to dabble in some lino prints as well, folding materials, a little bit into the craft realm as well, but I'm trying to bring that into my high art kind of practice. So my father's Aboriginal and my mother's non-Indigenous white Australian. I've always grown up knowing who I was and where I come from both mum and dad's sides. And a lot of the stories that I've grown up with from dad's side are starting to really influence my practice. Just the sheer weight of the history, the horrible histories that come with that side of the family, from purely being Indigenous in Australia. So Queensland was one of the harshest states in terms of policy for Indigenous people, and growing up hearing stories of the struggle are really starting to influence my works. My granddad was a really radical activist in the 60s and 70s, and when you're a little kid you don't quite understand the weight of those actions and specifically the actions of those times. As I've grown older and kind of started to be more aware of the political climates and just more of the histories, I've started to think about making work about these histories. The lino print in the exhibition is of a hostel that's named after my grandmother, Georgina Thompson. My granddad and grandma, as well as other community members, were really fundamental in setting up the health, legal, housing, all of those kind of fundamental services for Indigenous people in Brisbane. The other work in the exhibition is called Self-Portrait at Perga Mission. There's numbers 1 and 2, and it's a location where my family were taken to. They were forcibly removed from Thargomindah, which is in southwest Queensland, and taken 1,000 kilometres by horse and cart to this mission where every single aspect of their lives was controlled by government and the Salvation Army who ran the mission. It's been a place where I've been taken my whole life as a really celebrated place where people will come together and remember the past, remember those who've come before us. I've used a Belgian linen, which a lot of people confuse with Hessian, and I've actually been told off a little bit for people mistaking it for Hessian, but it's actually a really, really high quality artist linen. I enjoy some of the connotations around Hessian, and particularly for Indigenous people, sugar bags being given to them as clothing, and that's a really horrible part in our history, but visually I try and incorporate that through the use of this Belgian linen. So I try and pull in all these different materials to try and create a narrative purely based on the materials as well as the content in the work. I always feel that it's not quite enough if it's just a photoreal work, or if it doesn't have an added layer of complexity to it, whether it's an added layer of conceptual complexity or of the materials and the important interplay between material and concept.
I was born in Brisbane and I grew up at Carindale, which was Belmont then, and my dad was the local vet. And they also had a farm up at Kinkin, so I pretty much spent most of my childhood outside inventing and creating things from nature. But there was very much a scientific influence as well. My work explores ecology and characteristics of different species and how they can change and evolve over time. I'm really interested in genetics and where I come from. My grandfather came from Transylvania in 1926 and he had great dreams of being an inventor and creating patents. And he invented the toilet float for the cistern. This is the original float. It's got Eisler's patent. It's quite a beautiful object, and this is a copper arm. So they're very hard to find, mainly because they've been smashed as all the toilets have been replaced. But for this exhibition, I started to think about what was interesting that I could do with these bottles in terms of an installation, exploring my family history. And I started to think about, well, the fact that they're related to water and they're afloat. And then I started to think that both sets of grandparents came from different areas on a boat, but they're also like the bulb of a plant. And then I started to think about the family tree and things growing, and they represent me and they're kind of the root of all this. And so that's when I started to develop forms relating to different cultural and characteristics, I guess, of my family sprouting and growing from the tops of them. The Danish side of my family, I'm using the cow horns almost like a Viking's helmet. And the Dutch side, I've created some tulips, but I've used copper with everything. And that's relevant too because my grandfather came from a family of metallurgists and they were miners, and apparently they owned gold, copper and silver mines in Baeza in Transylvania as well. I'm very entrenched in Queensland because I was born here and I haven't shifted, and I guess I feel very connected to it in that way, but because all my family are from Europe, it's sort of like, oh, am I from here? But I am from here because I was born here, but I'm also from all these other places too. I like the work to be ambiguous and not illustrative, and I guess it will resonate with a lot of people too, in that they think about the journey of their family. The idea of family and finding out where everyone is from is really important to me because I'm always looking for reasons why I work the way that I do.
My name is Hessam Fitrati. I came to Australia in 2011 as a student. I'm doing my doctoral program at Queensland College of Art. This is my home now. This city is my home now. I know the streets. I don't need GPS anymore. It is like my hometown. Also, I born during the Iran-Iraq war. It has a great impact on me. In all my life, I create anti-war images. I'm totally against war in any manner. In the Middle East, displacement is a common experience. I saw many people, many Afghans, many Pakistanis, many Turkish, many Kurdish people displaced from their motherland. The paper boats are important because it is my interpretation about those boats which refugees are using to travel. Fragile and very unsafe. And the methodology which I've used in my work is pen and ink. I choose the black to simplify everything because I'm talking about the basic things. And on the paper, it has some sense of scratching something. I like the aggression because sometimes these stories are quite tragic, quite violent. The message is satirical. I use subliminal messages as well as irony and the other devices. Philosophically, etching is important for me because etching, again, is some scratches on a piece of metal. And also it's very classic and ancient. I like the process. I like the ceremonial aspect of these kinds of artworks. Nobody can be apart from his or her culture. It is part of you. You can't be separate. The Persian culture is about fine, peaceful visual material. Maybe I translated that into the fine pen and ink, but they are not peaceful, same as the Persian miniature, for example. When I came here, same as other international students and maybe a majority of migrants, I had this experience of isolation. I became concerned about the matter of displacement and the surrounding issues. The Anticipation series, it's about the people who left their motherlands to find a better life. The hope is the main pillar of my work. If you see the faces, they are not really happy, but they have hope. And I think this is important. Hope is more important than happiness, I think.
I'm a visual artist and I practice contemporary paper cutting. It's an important part of my cultural heritage, which is Chinese and also Malaysian, because my family moved to Malaysia prior to moving to Australia, where they had me. When my grandfather went to Malaysia from China with nothing but his pants, so he didn't have his shirt on. The people, when they leave like that usually due to some external reason. They just don't up and leave unless there was some conflict of some kind. And he went to Malaysia. He had a bike shop, and then pretty soon he moved to making rubber mats. And then he sent my father and some of his siblings overseas to study, and so my father ended up in Australia. When I was a child, my mum had chickens in the yard, and when she was young, that was actually her family business. And they used to do a lot of cloning of plants in the yard and grafting. And so my art project for the State Library is called Graft, and it's about, in a way, it is references to grafting of culture. You know, the process of grafting onto another tree, you have the rootstock, and it's quite brutal. You're sort of constantly cutting back this living organism to Frankenstein style, foster the life of a preferred plant, which you've grafted on top of it. And then in a way, it's sort of this interesting analogy of our country too, and multiculturalism, and it's not necessarily always an easy coexistence. A lot of the women in my family used to get together and practice folding and cutting paper as a group. I mean, what can be helpful to understand about the craft, particularly in the Chinese tradition, is that paper is an independent media. I just cut holes in the paper. There's no pre-drawing involved. When I can, I cut from live specimens as well. Well, the artworks themselves are family portraits, so the 3 generations of my family. They have the lychee, which is representative of my grandfather's home of Putian, because it's called the City of Lychees. And then they have my mother riding in a chicken as her family raised poultry, and then my father on a rubber plant. The last images of my brother and I are on a citrus plant. The artworks demonstrate connection to my heritage and my family. There's a dialogue there. I use a lot of allegorical references, and that's in a way quite Chinese as well. So I use that to try to make it accessible to people. I think family is very important to me. It's good for keeping you grounded and having you understand where you came from, and hopefully not necessarily indication of where you're going, but certainly the potential of that. I think if you want to understand yourself a bit more, you can look towards your family.